Okay, so I've put all this back together, but what I ended up doing was I could not get this spring on. It's just a far too strong a spring to be able to wind it back on over the section how I unwound the stock one. This is much weaker, and it's got sort of thinner links, etc. So it was easier to wind off. But yeah, this one's got much thicker links, etc. So or coils, however you want to say it. I had ended up having to remove the dead space blank at the end, and where there's a post that comes up that has like 4 tabs on it, and I basically had to compress those and open the outer. If you have a look at it, you'd see what I mean, and open it up so that I could get the plunger head off the shaft. So I managed to get it off, got the new spring on. Then I gave them a little bit of heat just to soften them a fraction and squeeze them all back into place, and then clipped the head back on. And then I've glued the dead space filler back into place, the black thing there. On the head of the piston or plunger, I just did a couple of revolutions with Teflon tape, or plumber's Teflon tape. It just pads it up a little bit. It makes the outer diameter of the O-ring just slightly larger, so that when it's fitting inside the plunger tube, it's a little bit tighter fit. So you don't want it tight so that it can't move freely. You just want it tight enough so that it seals completely. That way, when your piston or your plunger releases and is pushed up the tube, it gets a decent air seal and delivers better air pressure to your dart. Translates to a higher velocity, higher FPS, better distance, better accuracy, etc., etc. So, then I've now put that back into place, so that's ready to reinstall. The plunger tube is here. I've given that a coat of paint so that it, as the priming handle is primed back, and this slot is opened up at the front. The barrel that was behind it was bright orange. Now it's a black, so that it doesn't stand out. Same with the actual inner barrel. So when you look at the front of it, you're not going to see the high vis orange down the barrel. So that's that part of it. Obviously, I'm going to give the inside here just a bit of a coat of black, so that once we put the new clear barrel in, you can see through it, and it's contrast against the black around it. So when you're looking from the outside, you don't notice the barrel, you just see straight through. Next thing I'm going to have a look at is the flywheel cage. We'll have to unscrew that, pull it out, change the motors over. I'm toying with the idea of rewiring it directly to its own rev switch, so that it's completely independent of the operations of the blaster, and removing the top part of this trigger lock. So at the moment, that lock means that the rev trigger has to be depressed. If you can see how this works, the rev trigger has to be depressed. Oh, that did not work at all. Well, it hasn't got the other side of the shell holding it in place. It's a little bit more difficult. But yeah, essentially, as you pull the rev trigger, this retracts, which opens that up so that then your firing trigger can be depressed. So if you remove this top section of this lock, then you'll be able to pull your firing trigger, or the main trigger, activate the pusher, get the sounds, etc., without having to rev up the flywheels and get the additional noise that they create. So for cosplay purposes, what have you, you'll be able to pull the trigger and get the sounds Now, obviously, to do that, you'd use an empty magazine. So you take the magazine out, pop it back in empty, and then you can pull the trigger. Actually, I'll give you a demonstration. Give me 1 second. Okay, so magazine in, it becomes active. Now, obviously, normally you'd have to have the rev trigger depressed in order to pull the trigger. So let's remove this and this, get this lock out of the way. Now we can pull this trigger without having the noise of your rev trigger, you know what I mean. Actually feeds back now. It's really quite difficult because it's on the bench, but magazine in resets. So the speaker here. All I can actually hear is the motorcycling, so I can't hear the sounds being generated by the soundboard at all. But maybe once it's all assembled and the speakers on the outside and what have you, maybe we can, I don't know. Alright, but yeah, you get the gist. So I'll remove that part of the lock, and we'll press on with these other bits. Alright, back in a sec. So having a close look at this trigger lock, it looks like it's just that little front wall section that stops the main firing trigger from being depressed. So I'm just going to trim that out and see if that will work. Give me 2 seconds and I'll come back and show you and see if it works. Okay, so I had to remove a fair chunk of the trigger lock at the front there, as you can see, but now it will allow the main trigger to be depressed without having to press the rev trigger. So I just got to try and hold everything in place as a demonstration, because it'll all want to pop out. But so now you can actually depress that without having to activate the flywheels. So that's achieved what we want there. And obviously when you do it, you'll have to use an empty magazine. If you put in a full magazine, you're going to be pushing darts into the flywheels while they're not turning. It'll cause it to jam up. So always make sure you use an empty magazine if you're using it for cosplay purposes or whatever. All right, we'll press on.